I can tell you the exact moment my life split cleanly into before and after. And no, it wasn't the moment the CEO's son, Brandon, laughed in my face. It wasn't even the moment he mocked the one thing in my life I was quietly proud of. It was the moment after I smiled. Because that smile meant I had finally made a decision. My name is Holly. I'm 38. I drive a 12-year-old Toyota with a misfiring cylinder and a bumper held together by optimism. I've worked at Meridian Systems for 13 years, long enough to know where every contract, every skeleton, and every inflated invoice is buried. Formally, my title is Senior Compliance Auditor. Informally, I'm the corporate janitor. I fix the messes made by men who treat the company like a playground and the employees like props. That night, the night this all began, I was standing in the corner of the company's annual Innovation Gala, pretending my cheap cranberry soda was champagne. Everyone else was dripping in designer suits and dresses that cost more than my rent. I wore a simple black dress and my coat. God, the coat. Dark green wool, slightly frayed at the cuffs, one button missing. Thrifted for 18 euros 4 years ago. Warm. Practical. Mine. I had it draped over my arm because the coat check was full. That coat would become a symbol before the month was over. But that night, it was just something for them to sneer at. Enter Brandon. He swaggered over, oozing the confidence of a man who had never worked for anything in his life. Tall, handsome in an over-groomed sort of way, hair too slick, watch too shiny, smile too cruel. The heir to the company, but allergic to responsibility. He tapped my coat with 2 fingers like it might contaminate him. Saving up to finally buy some better clothes, Holly? He laughed loudly. Or is this one of those vintage charity shop chic things? Can never tell with people like you. People like you. Invisible, unimportant, replaceable. The room chuckled because laughter is easier than morality. I kept my voice flat. It's durable. He snorted. Sure, looks like it survived World War II. Planning on upgrading anytime soon? Behind him, 2 board members' wives smirked. A few junior analysts pretended not to stare. Someone whispered awkward under their breath. Brandon leaned in, smirking. So, seriously, what are you saving for? A new coat? A new car? Maybe a haircut that doesn't look like you do it yourself in the bathroom mirror? He expected me to shrink, to apologize, to play the part I'd played for years, the quiet, diligent worker who never pushed back. But he didn't know something. He didn't know what I'd been building. He didn't know what I owned. He didn't know who, exactly, he was laughing at. I looked him dead in the eye. No, Brandon, I said clearly. I'm saving to take over this company. Silence. A delicious, perfect silence. Then he burst out laughing. Loud, theatrical, wiping tears from his eyes. You? He wheezed. You're saving to take over Meridian? Oh, that's rich. Someone record this. Holly's become a comedian. People laughed with him. People always laugh with power. I didn't. I didn't even twitch. Because I wasn't joking. And because I already had step 1 secured. I walked away from him, slipping on my coat, buttoning it all the way up to my chin. It felt like armor. I left the gala early, slipping out before the CFO stumbled onto the stage for another forced joke about leaner budgets and fatter profits. Outside, the December wind stung my cheeks. I didn't mind. It woke me up. It reminded me of who I was and what I had survived. I sat in my old Toyota, engine coughing like an elderly smoker, and pulled out the folder I kept hidden under the passenger seat. 5 years of off-record audits. 3 years of quietly accumulating non-voting B-class shares every time the stock dipped. 12 years of knowing exactly how this company actually operated, and exactly how to break it open. Brandon thought I was saving for clothes. He had no idea the size of the storm already forming above him. He had no idea that I wasn't just an auditor. He had no idea that I was done being invisible. 1 month from that night, I would sit at the head of the boardroom table. And Brandon? He would stare at me like the ground had vanished beneath his feet. But none of that mattered yet. Tonight was simple. Tonight was the beginning. I turned the key, engine sputtering to life. Game on. I whispered into the darkness. The coat's collar brushed my cheek like a nod of approval, and the first domino began to fall. People like Brandon thought power lived in corner offices, expensive suits, and the smug confidence of inherited authority. That wasn't true. Not in Meridian systems, not anywhere. Power lived in the shadows. In the spreadsheets, no one double-checked. In the signatures, executives didn't remember signing. In the small, unglamorous details that built the company's foundation brick by brick. And for 13 years, that foundation had been mine to sweep. The Monday after the gala, I arrived at the office early, 6:42 a.m., before the lights were even on. The cleaning crew was still making their rounds. I nodded to Elena, the janitor who worked the early shift. She gave me a tired smile. "You're in before the coffee again," she said. "Bad habit," I answered. "Or a good one," she murmured. "Some people see you, even when the rest of the world calls you invisible." My cubicle sat deep in the compliance department's back corner, affectionately called the bunker. No windows, 2 flickering ceiling lights, a row of aging gray file cabinets that creaked open like arthritic knees. This wasn't where power usually lived, but it was where I had found it. I booted up my terminal and unlocked the encrypted folder buried beneath layers of innocuous files labeled Archive Annual Tax 2009. Inside were the tools of quiet rebellion. 12 years of discrepancies, internal memos executives assumed no one would ever read, legal agreements forgotten by everyone except me. Now that the decision was made, now that the first domino had tipped, I needed allies. Not many, just one to start. And I knew exactly who. Linda Cho, senior board member, former CFO, widely considered the only adult in a room full of posturing children. She had always been polite to me. Too polite, in fact, for someone who supposedly didn't know my name. But I knew hers. I also knew she distrusted Brandon. He treated her like a relic. And I knew she read every line of every financial packet before board meetings. She didn't tolerate sloppiness, which meant she was secretly drowning these days, because Meridian's books were no longer sloppy. They were fraudulent. Before approaching her, though, I needed proof that could crack the shell. I opened a folder labeled Debt Rotation, Phase 3. Numbers glowed on the screen. They told the story of a company spiraling quietly toward collapse, not from market conditions, but from arrogance. Meridian had taken out 3 short-term high-interest credit lines to cover strategic expansion. In reality, those expansions didn't exist. The money had been funneled into shell subcontractor payments that circled neatly back into accounts tied to Brandon and 2 of his closest executives. No one had noticed because Meridian was large, and large companies hide their rot well, unless someone has spent 13 years memorizing its scent. I printed a 3-page summary. Nothing explosive yet, just enough to raise the right eyebrows, and slipped it into a manila folder. I placed it in my coat pocket. The coat always came with me now. It felt symbolic, like each thread was woven from the choices that had brought me here. At 9:03 a.m., I headed upstairs to the 12th floor, the executive wing. The carpet was thicker there, the air colder, the lights warmer. A different world. Linda's assistant nearly jumped when she saw me. "Oh, Holly, hi. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said gently, "but I think she'll want to see me." She hesitated, then knocked on the glass office door. "Ms. Cho? Holly from compliance is asking to speak with you." There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, "Send her in." Linda stood from her desk, crisp suit immaculate, glasses perched at the edge of her nose. She was in her late 50s, elegant, deliberate, observant in a way that made you feel she saw 10 things you didn't know you were showing. "Holly," she greeted me. "To what do I owe the surprise?" I handed her the folder. She opened it, read silently, Read again. Her eyes lifted. A flicker of something sharp passed through them. "Does Brandon know you have this?" she asked. "No." "Does the CEO?" "No." "And do you," she continued slowly, "have the rest of the documentation that connects these transactions to the shell companies promising cloud integration partnerships?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She closed the folder. Her voice was low, steady, and far more serious than I had expected. "Holly, this is dangerous." "I know. You could lose your job." "I'm aware." "You could ruin the company." "No," I said softly. "I can save it." She studied me for a long moment, really studied me. Then she said something I will never forget. "People underestimate you, don't they?" "All the time." "Good," she said. "Underestimation is a kind of armor." She handed the folder back. Then she leaned closer. "Bring me everything," she said. "Every file, every inconsistency, every signature. If we move on this, it must be airtight." "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why help?" Linda exhaled, gaze drifting briefly to the framed photograph on her bookshelf. Her staff from the acquisition team, smiling years before Brandon arrived to dismantle their work. "Because I've watched this company rot from the inside," she said. "And because someone finally has the courage to pick up a scalpel instead of a broom." My heart thudded in my chest. One ally secured, one board member ready to listen. The second domino fell. And upstairs, behind a closed office door, the CEO's son had no idea the ground beneath him had just shifted. If the humiliation at the gala was the spark, and approaching Linda was the first controlled burn, then what happened next was the moment the flames stopped being mine to manage. It happened on a Wednesday, at exactly 11:18 a.m., when two shadows appeared at the edge of my cubicle. I looked up. Stephen Hart, head of corporate legal, stood in front of me with the expression of a man who already believed he had won. Behind him was Maya, the youngest compliance officer, bright, earnest, and still naive enough to believe Meridian's executives cared about law and ethics. "Holly," Stephen said, silk smooth. "We need a word." I closed my laptop slowly, as if it were fragile. "Of course. What's going on?" He lifted a printout, rows of timestamps in crisp black ink. "We've noticed unusual access patterns coming from your terminal. Restricted archives. Files that haven't been touched in years. Care to explain?" My pulse didn't spike. It steadied, became quieter, like a predator waiting. "I've been preparing an internal audit for Q1, I said evenly. "Historical data is relevant." "Interesting," he replied, lifting an eyebrow. "Because the CEO says he didn't request such a report. He requested a risk assessment. That requires context." Maya shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't used to this tone from Stephen. Quiet accusation wrapped in practiced cordiality. "We'll need your laptop," Stephen said. There it was, the real move. "For what purpose?" I asked. "A forensic scan," he replied. "Routine." It was not routine. It was the corporate equivalent of an invasive medical exam. If they found my encrypted files, if they even suspected I had built a private archive, my plan would crumble. But they wouldn't find them. The documents were no longer on the laptop. I had moved everything days earlier to an external drive stitched into the lining of my coat. Ironically, the very coat they mocked was now the safest vault I owned. Still, I didn't let that comfort show. "Here," I said, unplugging the laptop and handing it over. Stephen held it with the satisfaction of someone who believed he had just cornered a vulnerable opponent. "Until this is resolved," he added. "Your access to the internal network is suspended." I nodded politely. "Understood." He lingered a moment longer, tilting his head. "If you're hiding something," he said softly, "don't." He left with Maya trailing behind him, her expression apologetic. When they were gone, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. Not fear. Calculation. At 1:05 p.m., while I sat reorganizing paper files just to keep my hands busy, my personal phone vibrated inside my coat pocket. From unknown subject. He's panicking. I didn't need a signature. Linda never signed messages she didn't want traced. The email continued. He thinks someone is leaking internal financials. He's blaming Brandon. Auditors are coming tomorrow. Do you have enough? Enough? I had enough to collapse the entire executive suite. But collapse wasn't the goal. Control was. I typed back, yes. But timing matters. The board needs a full pattern, not fragments. Her reply came seconds later. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. Bring everything. I tucked the phone away and tried to refocus. That was when Maya appeared again, clutching a coffee so tightly the paper cup bent. Can I talk to you? She whispered. I motioned for her to sit. She didn't. She leaned over my desk instead. I don't think Stephen is being straight with you, she said, voice cracking around the edges. He told me to pull your last 6 months of access logs, not just last week. My stomach didn't drop, but something inside tightened. 6 months was deep. Too deep. And? I asked calmly. She swallowed. I couldn't find anything unusual. Your logs look normal. Too normal. It's like the system erased large chunks of your activity. I stared at her. I didn't erase anything, I said. I know, she whispered. That's why I'm telling you. Someone else did. A cold realization slid over me. It wasn't Linda. She would never touch anything digital. It wasn't Maya. She was terrified of breaking protocol, which meant someone with high-level access, someone I hadn't approached, someone who was watching me far more closely than I realized, had decided to protect me, or to manipulate me. Thank you, I said softly. She nodded, then hurried away. For the first time since the gala, the ground beneath me shifted, not from fear, but from uncertainty. My plan depended on quiet precision, hidden movements, controlled timing. But if someone else had stepped into the game, someone powerful enough to erase network logs, it meant the boardroom wasn't the only battleground anymore. Someone else was preparing for war, and they wanted me to stay in the fight. By Thursday afternoon, Meridian Systems felt less like an office and more like a pressure cooker ready to split at the seams. People walked faster, whispered quieter, stared longer at closed doors. Bad news has a way of soaking into the carpet before it ever reaches the emails. And today, the air was saturated. I spent most of the day pretending to work while waiting for 6 p.m. to arrive. My meeting with Linda, the moment everything would turn from preparation into execution. But with my laptop confiscated and my access suspended, all I could do was sort old files and act as though nothing inside me was vibrating like a live wire. At 4:10 p.m., the vibration intensified. Brandon appeared on the finance floor. He never came down here. The closest he usually got was the executive elevator above us, as if the air on our level was too humble to be breathed. But today he marched into the department, face flushed, tie crooked, phone in his hand like a weapon he didn't know how to use. "Where's Holly?" he barked. Every head turned toward me. I didn't stand. I didn't even look surprised. I just folded my hands on my desk. "Right here." He stormed over, leaning both hands on the edge of my cubicle as if trying to corner me inside it. "Did you talk to the board?" he demanded. "Did you tell them something? Because they're asking questions they shouldn't be asking." "No," I said. "Not yet, anyway." His eyes narrowed. "Don't play dumb. Someone's been feeding them information about procurement accounts and offshore transfers. And it started right after your little performance at the gala." Performance. That was one word for it. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said calmly. "Yes, you do," he snapped. "And I swear to God, Holly, if I find out you've been snooping..." "I'm a compliance auditor, Brandon." I cut in. "Snooping is literally my job." For a moment, he froze. Then something unfamiliar appeared on his face. Not anger, fear. It flashed for less than a second, but I saw it. He'd made mistakes. He knew it. And he was finally realizing that a person like me, the nobody, could connect dots he didn't even remember drawing. He lowered his voice. Look, just stop, okay? Drop whatever you're doing. You don't know the whole picture. You don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. Then explain it to me, I said. His jaw twitched. I don't owe you anything. No, I said. You owe the company everything. That struck him harder than the gala line. He straightened up, exhaled sharply, and stepped back. You're making a mistake, he said. Walk away. He left the floor without waiting for my response. I sat quietly as the whispers began. Colleagues darted glances at me, unsure whether to be impressed or terrified. Probably both. At 5:52 p.m., I slipped my coat on and headed upstairs. Linda's office was dim, lit only by a desk lamp and the evening glow filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She wasn't alone. Seated across from her was Gregory Shaw, the longest-standing board member and the only person who regularly challenged the CEO with actual data during quarterly reviews. He was in his mid-60s, sharp eyes, no patience for corporate theatrics. He looked up as I entered. So, he said, this is the one who's been digging. Linda motioned for me to close the door. I did. Show us, she said. I reached into my coat, my constant, quiet ally, and pulled out the external drive. I plugged it into Linda's laptop, opened the encrypted folders, and began walking them through 12 years of corporate decay. Unreported liabilities, shell company invoices tied to offshore accounts, personal expenses hidden as R&D investments, loan renewals written to hide the fact that Meridian was, financially speaking, a hollow building with a fresh coat of paint. Gregory's face hardened with every page. When I finished, he sat back, rubbing his temples. That idiot is going to take us all down with him, he muttered. And his father... God, he has no idea. He does now, Linda said quietly. I told him this morning we needed an emergency board session. Gregory stiffened. And he agreed? He didn't have a choice, Linda replied. The auditors arrive tomorrow. The ship is sinking. They both looked at me. Holly, Linda said, these files, if the CEO finds out you have them, he will retaliate. We need to protect you. I don't need protection, I said softly. I need the board to see the truth. And they will, Gregory said. But we need one more thing. What? Voting power. I felt it then. The shift. The click. The moment the game changed shape. Linda, Gregory said, turning to her, do we have enough to call for removal proceedings? We're close, she said. Very close, but we need one more vote. The CEO's son is already rallying loyalists. Gregory looked at me. Can you get us what we need? My throat tightened, not with fear, but with certainty. Yes, I said. I can. They exchanged a look, a real one, the kind that acknowledges a line being crossed. Linda closed her laptop slowly. Then we proceed tomorrow. As I left her office, the hallway felt colder than usual. Brandon had said I didn't know the whole picture. He was right. But he had no idea how fast I was learning it. And he certainly didn't know that tomorrow, the board would hear the truth. From a woman in a worn green coat who had finally stopped cleaning up other people's messes. Tomorrow, I would be the one making the mess, and they would be the ones scrambling to survive it. The following morning, Meridian Systems felt strangely still. Not calm. Calm is gentle. This was the tight, breathless stillness before a storm breaks open. People didn't make eye contact. Nobody lingered at the coffee machines. You could hear the hum of the air vents from across the floor. Everyone knew something was coming. Nobody knew what. At 8:47 a.m., an email hit every executive-level inbox. Emergency board meeting, noon, attendance mandatory. Subject: leadership review. I didn't receive it, of course. I wasn't on that list. But Linda forwarded it to me with 3 words. It begins today. I spent the next hours pacing the empty conference room on the floor below the boardroom. Waiting in a cubicle felt too small, too quiet, too much like the woman I had been for 13 years. At 11:58, I slipped on my green coat. Today it didn't feel like armor. Today it felt like identity. At 12:03, I walked up the stairs toward the executive level. I didn't know who had wiped my access logs 2 days earlier, but the timing of it made sense now. Someone up high, someone I hadn't spoken to yet, wanted me to reach this moment alive. Wanted the rot exposed. Wanted the dynasty that had crippled Meridian to fall. The hallway was lined with anxious assistants pretending to type while listening to muffled shouting behind the boardroom's frosted glass wall. Then, at 12:14 p.m., the shouting stopped. A single voice erupted, deep, furious, shaking with disbelief. Brandon. This is a setup. She's lying. I want her in this room now. For a moment, I froze. They were talking about me. Before I could decide whether to flee or push forward, the door swung open. Gregory stood there, expression unreadable. "Holly," he said. "Come in." I stepped inside. The room was a battlefield. Chairs askew, papers scattered, faces pale. Even the CEO, normally a man carved out of smug confidence, looked like someone had kicked the ground out from under him. And Brandon. He was red-faced, panting, pointing at me as I walked to the center of the room. "She's the leak," he shouted. "She's been digging into accounts she had no reason to touch. She's sabotaging us." I looked at him, not angry, not afraid, just tired of the lies. "Show me where I lied," I said calmly. Silence rippled outward like a wave. Linda spoke next. "Holly has provided documentation for every claim she made, transaction histories, internal memos, contract renewals signed under false pretenses." The CEO slammed his hand on the table. "That documentation could be fabricated." "It's not," Gregory said. "We had it cross-checked by an outside auditor last night." That was news to me. So that was who erased my logs. Someone outside the company. Someone they trusted more than themselves. The CEO's composure finally cracked. "You little," he started. But I cut him off. "For 13 years," I said softly, "I cleaned up your mistakes. I covered the holes you drilled into the foundation of this company. I stayed quiet. I stayed loyal. And you never noticed me. Not until I noticed the truth." I pulled the folder from my coat and set it on the table. "These are the accounts tied to your offshore subsidiaries. These are the R&D invoices used to finance your son's personal projects. These are the internal audits you suppressed. And these," I tapped the stack, "are the loan obligations due next quarter that you have no way to pay." The CEO looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Brandon leaned forward, voice trembling. "You don't understand the business, Holly. You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," I said. "This company is dying, not because of the market, because of you." Gregory cleared his throat. "We've taken a preliminary vote. We need one more signer to finalize removal proceedings." The CEO straightened, desperate. "You can't do this. My father built this company. I am Meridian. You need me." "No," Linda said quietly. "We need honesty." Her voice carried more weight than shouting ever could. The final board member raised her hand. A signature was added. It was done. The CEO sank into his chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Security was called. He didn't fight. Brandon did, at least verbally. But it didn't matter. As they escorted them out, Brandon turned back to glare at me. "This isn't over," he spat. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. When the door finally closed, the boardroom felt like a different place. The tension dissolved into something softer. Tired relief. The kind that comes only after truth has finally broken the surface. Gregory adjusted his glasses. Now comes the hard part. We need leadership. He looked at Linda. She shook her head gently. Not me. Then her eyes found mine. Gregory followed her gaze. Holly, he said slowly, you know the numbers better than anyone. You understand the dangers. You know how to rebuild. No one laughed. No one doubted. No one said I was too quiet or too plain or too small. They saw me. Really saw me. I'll take the interim role, I said. But we do this differently. No more secrets. No more vanity projects. No more treating employees like disposable parts. Agreed, Gregory said. When the meeting ended, I walked back through the halls that had once felt too big for me. People stared, not with confusion this time, but with something like hope. At my new office, I hung my green coat on the back of the door. The missing button, the frayed cuffs, the symbol no one understood. I sat in the chair at the head of the table. Shall we begin? I whispered. And for the first time in my life, the room answered me with silence that felt like respect, not erasure. A month ago, Brandon laughed at my coat. Today, it hung behind the CEO's desk. And that look on his face, I would never forget it.